Imagine this feminism has achieved all its goals. The world has shifted. Gender equality is no longer just a dream, it's the reality we live in. But what happens next? What happens to men when the systems of power and privilege they've relied on for centuries are dismantled? Do men lose their identity, their purpose? Or do they find something deeper, something that has been buried under layers of societal expectation? This isn't just a question about society. It's a question about you. Who are you without the systems that define you? Are you just a label, a man, a woman, a worker, a provider, or are you something more? Today we're diving deep into this philosophical paradox, and to guide us, we're bringing in the ideas of one of the greatest thinkers of all time, Immanuel Kant. Through his moral philosophy, we'll explore what happens not just to men, but to humanity in a world where feminism wins. Kant's philosophy begins with a simple but profound idea: human beings are not means to an end. We are ends in ourselves. Every single one of us has intrinsic worth not because of what we do, but because of who we are. Think about that for a moment. Your value isn't tied to your job, your gender, or your status. It's tied to your capacity to reason, to make moral choices, and to act with integrity. But here's the catch: society doesn't work that way. For centuries, men have been told their worth is tied to their ability to provide, to protect, to dominate. Women, on the other hand, have been told their worth is tied to their beauty, their nurturing, their submission. Feminism seeks to dismantle these roles to create a world where everyone is valued equally. So here's the first question: if feminism succeeds in dismantling these roles, what happens to the men who have built their entire identity around them? What happens to the father who has always defined himself as the provider? What happens to the man who has always been told that his value lies in his strength, his leadership, his dominance?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Picture this: a man wakes up one day in a world where feminism has won. He looks around and realizes that the traditional markers of his identity are gone. He's not defined by his paycheck, his status, or his ability to protect. For some, this might feel like liberation, but for others it might feel like annihilation. And this is where Kant's philosophy becomes deeply relevant. Kant believed that our true worth lies in our moral autonomy and our ability to act according to principles that we can will to become universal laws. In other words, our value doesn't come from what we do or what others think of us. It comes from our capacity to live ethically, to contribute to the greater good, to treat others and ourselves with respect. But here's the hard truth: most of us have never been taught to value ourselves in this way. We've been taught to measure our worth by external markers: our jobs, our relationships, our possessions. So the real question is, can we unlearn those lessons? Can we learn to see ourselves and each other as ends in ourselves? Let me ask you something: who are you without your job? Without your gender? Without your social status? It's a terrifying question, isn't it? Because it forces us to confront the possibility that we don't know who we are at all. Here's a practical example. Imagine a man who has spent his entire life being the provider for his family. He believes that his worth lies in his ability to earn money, to protect, to lead. But in this new world, his role is no longer necessary. His wife earns just as much as he does, maybe more. His children don't need his protection, they need his understanding. What does he do? Does he collapse into despair, or does he rise to the challenge of redefining himself? This is the kind of transformation that feminism demands, not just from men, but from all of us. It forces us to confront the parts of ourselves that we'd rather ignore. It forces us to ask, who am I really? And am I willing to change? But let's not romanticize this process. Change is hard, it's messy, and it's terrifying, because it means letting go of the systems and structures that have defined us for so long. It means stepping into the unknown. This is where Kant's idea of moral autonomy becomes not just abstract, but deeply practical. Kant believed that true freedom comes not from doing whatever we want, but from acting according to principles that respect the dignity of all human beings. In other words, true freedom comes from living a life of integrity, a life that aligns with our deepest values. So here's the challenge in a world where feminism has won. Can men find new ways to define themselves that are not tied to power? Can they find meaning in relationships, in creativity, in moral action? Can they learn to see themselves and others not as means to an end, but as ends in themselves? Let me share a story with you. Imagine a father and daughter. The father has spent his entire life providing for his family. He believes that his worth lies in his ability to protect and provide. But his daughter, inspired by feminism, refuses to conform to traditional roles. She doesn't want to be protected, she wants to be an equal partner. At first, the father feels lost. He doesn't know how to relate to his daughter in this new paradigm. But over time, he begins to see her not as someone who needs his protection, but as someone who challenges him to grow. He learns to value her not for what she does, but for who she is. And in doing so, he learns to value himself in the same way. This is the kind of transformation that is possible in a world where feminism has won. It's not about men losing their power, it's about everyone gaining their humanity. But here's the paradox in dismantling traditional power structures. Feminism also dismantles the traditional sources of male identity. And this raises a crucial question: can men find a new identity that is not tied to dominance, to competition, to control? Can they learn to find value in vulnerability, in cooperation, in equality? Let me ask you something: what kind of world do you want to live in? A world where people are valued for their power, their roles, their utility? Or a world where people are valued for their humanity, their morality, their capacity for growth? The choice is yours. But remember, every choice you make, every action you take, shapes the world we live in. So choose wisely. Let's get into the heart of the question. What does it mean for men to live in a world where feminism has achieved everything it set out to do? Not just for society at large, but for the individual man trying to navigate it. What happens to him when the systems that once shaped his identity collapse? And more importantly, what replaces them? To understand this, we need to talk about power, how it operates, and how it changes when equality becomes the foundation of everything. For centuries, power has been tied to dominance. Men were taught to lead, to control, to compete. But in a world of true equality, dominance no longer holds value. The question isn't what do you control, it becomes what do you contribute. This shift is monumental. It forces men to face a truth that's been buried for a long time: control was never the source of their worth. It was just a way to avoid asking deeper questions about meaning. In a world where control is irrelevant, the real work begins: figuring out what purpose looks like without it. Here's a simple thought. Imagine a man who spent his entire life climbing the corporate ladder. His self-worth has always been tied to his success, his title, his ability to outperform others. But in this new world, his success doesn't define him anymore. His role doesn't make him more valuable than his colleagues. The ladder he's been climbing for years suddenly vanishes. So what now? This isn't just a hypothetical. It's a reality that many people already face. When the structures propping up your identity are gone, there's no choice but to rebuild. It's not easy. It's uncomfortable, even painful. But here's where Kant's ideas can help. He argued that the core of human dignity lies in our ability to make moral choices, not because we'll be rewarded, but because it's the right thing to do. It's a shift from asking, what do I get out of this? To what kind of person do I want to be? This might sound abstract, but it's not. It's the foundation of everything. If men want to thrive in a world of equality, they'll need to start thinking differently, not in terms of what they can achieve, but in terms of how they can live with integrity. Let's break this down further. In a traditional system, roles are clear. Men are providers, protectors, leaders. Women are caregivers, nurturers, supporters. But when those roles are dismantled, men and women are left with the same challenge, creating meaning for themselves. This is where things get interesting. When you strip away the expectations, the stereotypes, the rules, what's left? For some, it's terrifying. For others, it's freeing. But for everyone, it's a blank slate. And with that comes responsibility, the responsibility to choose what kind of life you want to live, what kind of relationships you want to build, and what kind of world you want to help create. But let's not sugarcoat it. This kind of freedom is hard. It requires people to confront parts of themselves they've been avoiding for years. It forces them to let go of old habits, old beliefs, old ways of thinking. And not everyone will be ready for that. Some will resist. Some will cling to the past. Some will try to rebuild the systems that feminism works so hard to dismantle. But here's the thing: progress doesn't wait. It doesn't ask for permission. The world changes whether we're ready or not. The real question is whether we'll adapt or whether we'll be left behind. Let's consider how this plays out in relationships. In a traditional system, relationships are often based on roles. The man provides, the woman nurtures. Each person knows their place. But in a world of equality, those roles disappear. Relationships become partnerships built not on obligation but on mutual respect. For some men, this will be a relief. They'll no longer feel the pressure to be the sole provider, the protector, the leader. They'll have the opportunity to build relationships based on who they are, not what they can do. But for others, this shift will feel like a loss. They'll struggle to understand their place in this new dynamic. They'll feel like something has been taken from them. And in a way, they're not wrong. What's been taken is the illusion of authority, the idea that their role gives them power over others. This isn't easy to accept. It requires humility. It requires a willingness to let go of control and embrace equality. But for those who are willing to make that leap, the rewards are profound. In a world of true equality, relationships can become deeper, more authentic, more meaningful. They're no longer based on power dynamics, they're based on connection. But what about work? In a world where feminism wins, what happens to men in the workplace? The answer isn't as simple as men lose power, women gain it. It's more nuanced than that. In this new world, success is no longer defined by dominance. It's defined by collaboration. It's not about who can climb the highest, it's about who can contribute the most. This means that men will need to rethink the way they approach work. It's no longer about proving yourself. It's about working together to achieve something greater than yourself. For some men, this will be a challenge. They'll need to let go of the competitive mindset that has defined so much of their lives. They'll need to learn how to listen, how to collaborate, how to value other perspectives. But for others, this shift will be a revelation. They'll discover that true success isn't about being the best, it's about making a difference. Here's something to think about: what does strength look like in a world where feminism has won? For centuries, strength has been associated with dominance, with control, with power. But in this new world, strength takes on a different meaning. It's not about overpowering others, it's about empowering them. It's not about being the loudest voice in the room, it's about listening to the voices that have been silenced. It's not about holding on to power, it's about sharing it. This isn't just a change for men. It's a change for everyone. It's a new way of thinking about what it means to be human. And it's not easy. It requires us to let go of old ideas, old habits, old ways of being. But it's worth it. Because in the end, it's not about what we lose. It's about what we gain. Let's end with a thought. In a world where feminism wins, men aren't left behind. They're not pushed out or forgotten or devalued. They're given the opportunity to step into a new kind of identity, one that's not based on dominance, but on integrity. One that's not about power, but about purpose. One that's not defined by what you take, but by what you give. This isn't just a question about men. It's a question about all of us. What kind of world do we want to create? What kind of people do we want to be? These aren't easy questions, but they're the ones that matter most. In the end, the goal isn't to win or lose. It's to grow. It's to build a world where everyone, men and women alike, can live with dignity, with respect, and with purpose. And that's a world worth fighting for. What happens when gender ceases to be the defining factor in how we see ourselves and others? Not just in theory, but in real life. What happens when we strip away the labels, the hierarchies, the expectations, and see people for what they are, human beings first? This is where the conversation turns. Because if feminism wins completely, its victory isn't just about equality between men and women. It's about something much bigger, redefining what it means to be human. This isn't a simple process. It means abandoning the old scripts we've lived by for so long that they feel like second nature. Men as protectors, women as nurturers. Men as dominant, women as submissive. These ideas are so deeply ingrained that even when we try to reject them, they still shape how we think and act. But in a world where feminism wins, these scripts are irrelevant. They're relics of a past that no longer serves us. Let's think about masculinity for a moment. For centuries, it's been tied to strength, control, and stoicism. But what if these old definitions of masculinity are holding men back? What if they're not empowering but limiting? In a world of gender equality, men are freed from the need to conform to these outdated ideals. They can embrace vulnerability without fear of judgment. They can express their emotions, build deeper connections, and find strength in cooperation rather than competition. But this isn't just about men. It's about everyone. The dismantling of rigid gender roles creates space for something new, something more human. It allows us to build a society where people aren't defined by what they're supposed to be, but by who they are. Let's talk about freedom. Not freedom in the sense of doing whatever you want, but real freedom, the kind that comes from living authentically. In a world where feminism wins, freedom looks different. It's no longer tied to power or privilege. It's tied to self-awareness, to knowing who you are and acting in line with your values. This kind of freedom isn't given to you by society. It's something you create for yourself. But here's the challenge: real freedom requires responsibility. It requires you to take ownership of your choices, your beliefs, your actions. When there are no more roles to fall back on, no more scripts to follow, you're left with one question: how will I live? This is the question that men and women will face in a world of equality. And it's not an easy one to answer. Here's the truth: many people are afraid of freedom. They're afraid of the responsibility that comes with it. It's easier to follow the script, to do what's expected, to stay within the boundaries society has set for you. But in doing so, you lose something essential: your individuality, your humanity, your ability to create a life that's truly your own. Feminism, at its core, isn't just about dismantling systems of oppression. It's about creating space for this kind of freedom for everyone. It's about giving people the chance to define themselves, to live authentically, to build relationships and communities based on respect and mutual support. And when that happens, something extraordinary becomes possible, a world where people are valued not for their gender, but for their character. Let's shift the focus now. What does this mean for relationships? In a world of equality, relationships are no longer shaped by expectations or obligations. They're shaped by choice. This is where things get interesting. Because when you remove the old dynamics, when you take away power, control, and dependence, you're left with something much purer. Relationships become partnerships. They're no longer about fulfilling a role. They're about connection. But this shift isn't automatic. It requires work. It requires people to unlearn the habits and assumptions they've carried for years, sometimes for generations. It requires men, especially, to let go of the idea that their worth is tied to what they can provide or control. And it requires women to let go of the idea that they must conform to traditional roles to be accepted or loved. This isn't easy. It's uncomfortable. It forces people to confront parts of themselves they'd rather ignore, the insecurities, the fears, the need for validation. But it's worth it. Because when you strip away the roles, what's left is something far more meaningful: relationships based on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. And that's the kind of connection that can truly transform lives. Let's talk about something deeper. The idea of equality often gets framed as a battle between men and women. But that's a mistake. True equality isn't about competition, it's about collaboration. It's about recognizing that we're all part of the same system, that our lives are interconnected, that our liberation is tied to each other's. This is where the Kantian perspective becomes crucial. Kant argued that we should treat every person as an end in themselves, never as a means to an end. This principle applies to everyone: men, women, everyone in between. It demands that we see each other not as tools or obstacles, but as individuals with inherent dignity and worth. In a world where feminism wins, this principle becomes the foundation of everything. It's no longer about who has power or who deserves it. It's about creating a society where everyone's humanity is recognized and respected. This is the ultimate goal, not just for feminism, but for humanity as a whole. But let's not pretend this is simple. It requires a fundamental shift in how we see ourselves and each other. It requires us to let go of the need to dominate, to control, to compete. It requires us to embrace a new way of thinking, one that values connection over division, cooperation over conflict, and respect over power. So where does this leave us? What happens to men in a world where feminism has won? The answer isn't that men are left behind. It's that they're given the chance to move forward, to redefine themselves, to build lives and relationships that are more authentic, more fulfilling, more human. Let's imagine a future. A young boy grows up in a world where feminism has achieved its goals. He's not taught that his worth is tied to his strength or his ability to dominate. He's taught that his worth comes from his character, his kindness, his integrity. He's not told to suppress his emotions or hide his vulnerability. He's encouraged to express himself, to connect with others, to build relationships based on respect and trust. This boy grows into a man who doesn't see feminism as a threat, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to live in a world where everyone is valued, where everyone has a voice, where everyone has the chance to thrive. This is the potential of a world where feminism wins. It's not a loss for men. It's a victory for humanity. Let's end with this: what kind of person do you want to be? In a world of equality, this is the only question that matters. It's not about what role you play, what power you hold, or what others expect of you. It's about how you choose to live, how you treat others, and what you contribute to the world. The truth is, we're all in this together. Men, women, everyone, we're all part of the same story. And the question isn't whether feminism will win. The question is what we'll do with the world it creates. The choice is ours. Let's make it count.